I think today the Iranians are the weakest they've been, not only over the past year, but for many years. Their core deterrent capability, which were their ballistic missiles, their drones, and their cruise missiles, has been exposed.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of What's Really Happening. I'm Dr. Tad Schnoffer, the Strategy and Research Manager here at the Global and National Security Institute at the University of South Florida. As always, I'm joined by GNSI's Executive Director, retired Marine Corps General Frank McKenzie, as we explore global and national security issues. Today, we're going to discuss the ramifications of Israel's recent strike on Iran and what the next steps are for the Middle East. All right, well, welcome back, General.
Tad, always great to be with you.
So, Israel acknowledged last weekend it's an attack on Iran. What's the significance of this attack?
Well, the significance of the Israeli attack was really in a couple of different dimensions. First of all, it was a restrained attack. They appear to have gone after the Iranian air defense system and dismantled all of the Iranian S-300 systems, which is a very good Russian-provided air defense system. They had 4. They probably have 0 that are operational now. They also struck some missile production facilities. What they did not strike was Iranian leadership. They did not strike the nuclear target, and they didn't strike the oil infrastructure target. So it was a very precisely targeted strike, and it appears to have had remarkable success. And so what that does is, first of all, it demonstrates, again, Israeli restraint. It also demonstrates Israeli technical prowess, and it also clears the way for future strikes should they be needed. So right now, as a result of the Israeli strike, and as we talk, the Iranians appear to be making a decision to either strike back or not strike back. My judgment is, Tad, that the Israelis have laid a trap for the Iranians. And if Iran strikes back, frankly, it is doubtful that their attack, whatever scale and scope it is, will be more successful than the last one. And the last Iranian attack on Israel, the last 2 Iranian attacks on Israel, have been largely notable for their failures. Their inability to hit anything important, the fact that very few casualties were accrued as a result of the attack. So the Iranians are on the horns of a dilemma. If they strike back, the Israelis will now be in a posture where they can come back and hit the Iranians very, very hard because of the reduction in Iranian air defense capabilities. Now, the Iranians aren't stupid. They know this, and that will certainly enter into their calculations, and it may actually drive their response to be in a new and different way. But the Iranians don't have a lot of good options when it comes to launching an attack against Israel from Iran, particularly since Lebanese Hezbollah is off the table right now. I don't think Lebanese Hezbollah is in a position to coordinate a major attack on Israel. By that, I mean a large multi-missile attack on Israeli population centers. Certainly, they can continue the tit-for-tat across the northern border, which the Israelis have now entered Lebanon and are probably in the process of reducing as we speak. So without Lebanese Hezbollah, Iran's options are quite limited.
So what was Israel's thought process behind it? To just put Iran in this dilemma, or also provide a way to get out of this spiral that they've been going through with increasing violences?
Well, I think it probably served both those things. It gives Iran the opportunity for an off-ramp by not striking what they would consider to be a vital target. At the same time, it prepares the battle space for further Israeli activity should it be needed. And again, as I noted, it demonstrates Israeli technical superiority, which the Iranians will have noted.
But why not just go hard, if you will, and strike those nuclear and energy targets and really, give it to the Iranians?
Well, I think a couple of reasons, Tad, but principally, I think the United States argued against doing that. Now, look, the Israelis are going to make decisions based on what they think is in the best interest for Israel, as any nation should, and Israel's no exception. But I think, we brought a Theater High, a THAAD battery in designed to defend against ballistic missiles. I think that was probably part of a negotiation process with the Israelis. If we'll bring THAAD in, they will, they will look to the targets that they strike. And they did not strike those high escalatory targets. So it puts Iran, again, a little bit on the horns of a dilemma about how they respond to this.
Now, there was some talk that Iran might be planning an attack from Iraq and still using proxies to, again, attack Israel, but not elicit such a response. Do you think that's a possibility?
Certainly it's a possibility. It will be difficult for them to gain the volume of fires they need to penetrate Israeli defenses with those fires. They have not shown success in doing it in the past. I don't know why I would expect this one to be more successful than prior attempts. But that is certainly possible. Again, I just don't think the chances of a success are very high. They could also, Tad, choose to strike at other targets in the region. They could strike at Gulf nations.
Sure.
They could strike at U.S. air bases across the region. That would have the effect of widening the war, and the Iranians will have to think carefully about doing that.
Well, now, it's been over a year since the October 7th attack and this conflict. What is the overall goal now that the situation on the ground has changed so much over the last year for the Iranians? Obviously, they're not winning in any easy definable terms. So are they just in survival mode?
I think today the Iranians are the weakest they've been, not only over the past year, but for many years. Their core deterrent capability, which were their ballistic missiles, their drones, and their cruise missiles, has been exposed. It has not been shown to be ineffective when smashed against Israeli defenses. So that's very concerning to them. And we've in earlier discussions, Ted, we've often talked about the primary goal of Iranian foreign policy is regime preservation.
Right.
They believe in order to ensure that the theocratic regime that sits atop the Iranian government is preserved, they need to have established a form of deterrence against Israel. It's obvious they have not been able to maintain deterrence against Israel. In fact, all of the initiative today rests on the Israeli side. They can go back in and do about what they want over Iran. The Iranians are very much aware of that. So the decision the Iranians are going to have to make is, do we want to pull back from this, pull back from the brink, take an off-ramp, try to reconstitute our ballistic missile force, make it more lethal? That won't be an overnight process. Perhaps find a way to get more air defense assets in. That won't be an overnight process because, frankly, most of the spare S-300s are now in use by the people who make the S-300, the Russians, in Ukraine and in Western Russia. So hard to see how they'll be able to regenerate that capability very shortly. Moreover, Tad, I think it might be important to the Iranians to try to buy space and time for Hezbollah to escape the crushing blows that Israel's landing on it right now, give them an opportunity to reconstitute. Now, look, on the other side of the equation, the Israelis are also keenly aware of this.
Sure.
So I don't know what their response would be.
So Iran's in a tough spot. They don't have any easy way to defend against future air attacks, for example. And the Israelis know this, and the Israelis are still having a very aggressive, ground campaign in southern Lebanon, obviously still operating in Gaza. So from the Israeli perspective, where are they going? They're trying to give the Iranians a way to de-escalate, but they're still very much committed to continuing their operations against Hamas and Hezbollah.
So, Tad, I think, and look, I'm just an observer looking in from the outside. I think the primary goal of Israeli policy right now is they've got to stop the low-level, short-range missile attacks from Lebanese Hezbollah into northern Israel. They've got to find a way to get the 80,000 Israeli citizens that have been evacuated south back up in their kibbutzes, their homes, their towns, and let business be reestablished up there with an assurance that these attacks won't continue. I would say that's the number one priority for Israel right now. The other priorities that are very high, but perhaps not as high as that, is that you would like to reestablish deterrence with Iran, so that Iran will stop attacking you. And while the Israelis have been successful in defending themselves against it, I think nonetheless they'd like for Iran to state that they're at an off-ramp and to actually pull back. And there are ways that Iran could choose to message that, some of which might be visible to us, some of which might not be visible to us. Remember, always in the back of the Israeli mind is the threat of Iranian pursuit of a nuclear weapon. And so Israel also has to be thinking that the Iranians have been beat up so badly right now, they might choose at this time to do something they have not done in the past, which is actually cross that nuclear Rubicon and develop enough fissile material to build a weapon. That's possible. That would certainly, I think, trigger more highly aggressive Israeli action should that occur. And of course, the United States has also said that we will not allow Iran to possess a nuclear weapon. So if Iran chose to go that way, particularly with their air defenses denuded, they'd be in a very vulnerable situation.
Well, before talking more about nukes, I just wanted to drop a quick note that the audio of this episode is going to be featured on our upcoming podcast, At the Boundary, later next week. And I just wanted to let the audience know that for them listening.
Ted, you do great work with At the Boundary, as does the rest of the team. I would encourage people to listen in on it. You cover a wide variety of topics and cover it very well. It's a great podcast. I listen to it frequently.
Excellent. And now back to nuclear weapons. So why has Iran not taken the risk, though? Wouldn't nuclear weapons give them that deterrence effect, or would it draw more fire to them?
Well, it's not an easy thing to actually do this. They're actually close on fissile material. They could probably have enough fissile material within a matter of a few weeks, a very few weeks, to do that. But that just gives you the opportunity to build a test article, not a deliverable weapon. And a test article is big. You're only going to get it to Tel Aviv on a semi-truck if you want to take it there, and it's hard to see how that happens. So you actually have to refine your test article, build it into a weapon. At the same time, you've got to develop missile technology that will take it to the target. For the sake of our argument today, let's say it's Tel Aviv. Mm-hmm. You've got to build a reentry system that will allow it to survive the heat of entry at theater range. It's an aeronautical engineering problem as much as a physics problem right now. And that will take months, many months to solve. We will know if the Iranians elect to cross the fissile boundary and across that boundary. They'll be at a period of great vulnerability should they elect to go that route. These facts are known to the Iranians, but it's made more stark by the recent failure of their air defenses.
Yeah. So pretty much, even if they went the option of trying to create a nuclear weapon, they couldn't get to the point where it's deliverable to make it a deterrence effect.
They can get there if they're allowed to get there, but they're in a period of great vulnerability because they will have declared they're going nuclear. They will not yet have the ability to be a nuclear armed state. The ability to be a nuclear armed state means you have a weapon and you have the ability to deliver it against a putative opponent.
Right. So just developing the material, like you said, is not enough. They got to figure out how to deliver it.
And they know how to do it, and they can do some of this very quickly. But the aeronautical engineering is a significant task.
And likely, like you said, someone could strike them before they get anywhere.
The United States has said we won't allow them to have a weapon, and Israel has said essentially the same thing.
When speaking of striking Iran, in this case, Israel officially acknowledged that they struck the Iranian homeland. Is there something different between them acknowledging it, but in the past where it's just been assumed certain attacks have been Israeli?
It's obviously some form of messaging from Israel, maybe letting the Iranians know we're very serious about it, so we're going to formally acknowledge that we did it. Look, we all know it wasn't the Dutch that executed the attack, and it wasn't the United States because we said we didn't, and we didn't. So that really only leaves one country in the region that can do it. But to announce and to formally take responsibility for it probably is designed to focus the Iranian mind on the consequences of continuing to engage in this back and forth.
Right. And it seems like the Israelis are all in. There's not, at this point, they're going to finish until they've reached all their objectives.
That's certainly a possibility.
You noted a little bit about this, but what influence does the U.S. play on Israeli decision-making at this point? They're obviously in consultation, but how much play do they have?
I think we clearly influenced the scope and scale of the latest attack. I think the THAAD weapon that went into Israel certainly was a chip in that negotiation.
Well, what do you think if the U.S. was not pushing for restraint? Do you think the Israelis would have attacked more?
Don't know the answer to that.
Yeah,
I think both Israeli responses to very large-scale attacks on Israel, both of the Israeli responses have been very, very measured, very, very focused, and very adroit, frankly.
Right. And obviously with some U.S. consultation in there. But to kind of bring it back to the U.S. a little bit more, what do you think the role of the U.S. election is playing in the conflict right now? Are actors waiting till after the election to see what happens? Or is it in the calculus in the Iranian and Israeli mind?
I think the Israelis know and have an intimate understanding of our election process. The Iranians see it from a distance and may not have that clear an understanding of what's happening. If the Iranians choose to respond before the election, it will probably be with an intent to affect the election. And look, we know very clearly that they don't want President Trump to be elected. They've been clear on that. The fact they're trying to kill him, and as the New York Times and a number of other publications have stated, I think makes that point pretty clear. So that might be an Iranian attempt to manipulate the election by kinetic means, even as they're trying to manipulate the election by other means inside the United States with misinformation and disinformation. Massive campaigns.
And either way, what's the next administration going to have to deal with? So the election obviously is, next week. Election's over. We still have that period before the new administration takes an office. What do you think the actors are going to do on the ground in that time between?
So typically the period between election day and inauguration day is a period where the outgoing U.S. administration, whether it's going to stay within the same party and move to another party, you're focused on sort of maintaining the status quo.
Right.
Many external actors see that as a period of vulnerability. So it might be that you would see renewed Iranian activity during that period. Certainly possible.
Right. Yeah. And then in the end, I guess, how does this end? So over a year of this conflict, is there any end in sight for at least a ceasefire for the region?
I think we're pretty far away from a ceasefire in Gaza. I would argue that the Israelis have defeated Hamas. They have not destroyed Hamas. They still think they have work to do in Gaza. They're going to certainly try to get their hostages out, although I think it's hanging on a very slender chance of that actually happening. The big thing, actually, of course, is up in the north. They've got to stop the fires against the northern tier of cities, kibbutzes, and settlements. And so that's why you now have Israeli ground forces north of the Lebanese border operating to do that. So that's a very important task for them. Same thing the Israelis would like for Iran to stand down, to stop attacking them. That's a decision that rests with Iran. And we'll know probably in the next few days, maybe by the time this podcast is out, whether Iran has chosen to de-escalate, to delay their attack, because eventually they will attack, but it might be delayed for many months or even years. But are they going to go ahead and do something very promptly?
And one last thing I wanted to touch on was the Israeli campaign of targeting leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah. Have you seen that to be effective over the last 8 or 9 months since they've really implemented that?
I think it's been effective against Hezbollah. I think it has been, because of the nature of the fight in Gaza, it perhaps has not been as effective, but I think it has certainly been effective against Hezbollah.
Okay, excellent. Any final comments on the region, sir, as we look at obviously the conflict continuing to brew there?
No, as usual, Tad, it's a very fragile, very fraught period in the region, and all eyes are on Iran and what they're going to do next.
All right, well, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Tad. Always a pleasure.
And that's going to wrap up another episode of What's Really Happening. Today, we held an intriguing discussion with GNSI's Executive Director, retired Marine Corps General Frank McKenzie, about recent events in the Middle East and Israel's recent attack on Iran. As always, I'm Dr. Tad Schnaufer, the Strategy and Research Manager here at the Global National Security Institute, and we thank you for joining us today as we look forward to our next conversation when we find out what's really happening.